So when they dig out, you're number 17. You're number 14. All right. Where do we quit there? Did we get to the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo? Did we get to the Gadsden Purchase? How much did the United States pay for not conquering the Mexican Cession, California and New Mexico? How much did the U.S. pay? They paid $50 million plus how much more?
13 million.
Not 13. 3. You got an extra one, not a big deal. So 18.3 million total. The United States paid off part of their debt. But let's be clear, the war was a war of interest, of conquest. And who was the general? Yeah, I'm looking at you. We're circling the desk. We're going to fight it out. Okay. What do we have? Now I forgot what I was going to say. Oh, who was the general who took Mexico City for the United States? Who was it? Winfield Scott. And who would be the hero of the Battle of Buena Vista? Old Rough and Ready, who tried to take away his army. Yeah, Zachary Taylor. Who did the United States help put back into power in Mexico City? Yeah, Santa Anna. That turned out to be a slight mistake, but it worked out in the end. And we're not done with Santa Anna. He would still be around. He would leave Mexico City, leave Mexico for a while, be ousted from power, come back into power, be ousted from power. He's kind of the hero in Mexico. There's a big statue of him in the main square of Mexico City, more than anything else, because he stood up to the United States. Because the United States more and more is going to be seen as a bully for much of Latin America. One more thing, if anyone's ever had chewing gum before, you can thank Santa Anna. Santa Anna brought chewing gum to the United States. He was in New York City during the Civil War. He brought it with him and started selling it in 1864 in New York City. And that would spread it worldwide. So if you like chewing gum, Santa Anna. We're never done with Santa Anna. And so, what we have here? We got the Gadsden Purchase. All right. Well, during the war, a proviso to an appropriations or spending bill. Proviso means an amendment. They don't use that anymore, they just say amendment. Will be proposed by a man by the name of David Wilmot. Obviously, do not write down the whole thing. This is the very simple proviso, basically saying any money appropriated for this war cannot go out unless this is followed. So write down Wilmot Proviso, and then 1846, and then we'll read it. Very basic law, very simple. What does it say about any land that the United States is going to get from Mexico? Yeah.
No slavery.
Yeah, and what is the term for no slavery in the territories? Free soil. So free soil in, what was the name I give you for land the United States got from Mexico? Do you remember? Free soil in the Mexican Cession. So that's what we have to get. Free soil in the Mexican Cession. What's a Mexican Cession? New Mexico and California. Remember, Texas is already in the Union. The fight was over. The Rio Grande is the border. And then the United, they claim that. And then California, remember, there's a whole war of independence. He was a free soil Democrat. He did not want the expansion of slave power. And the thing was, this was in the House. Remember, a bill has to pass both the House and the Senate. And the amazing thing was, it passed the House. It passed the House. Blew Southerners away. Southern Whigs and Democrats assumed they'd get enough allies for various reasons, for favors in the North, they would not pass it, but it passed. Well, remember, the Senate was designed to stop radical action, and that's what happened. It failed in the Senate. So in 46, passed the House, failed the Senate. The very next appropriation bill, back then they had a very weird way. They basically had to do an appropriations bill, a spending bill, for every law, for everything the government spends. And that was just crazy complicated then. Today it's unimaginable with a federal budget of $6.2 trillion. And so they would eventually pass this in the House 42 times over the next year and 3 quarters. Abraham Lincoln talked about while he was in the House, all they did is vote on this and then fight. By the end of 1847, all you had to do is say Wilmot, and you have a fist fight. It was that divisive. There would soon be fist fights in the cloakroom. People started bringing knives and guns to the floor of the United States House, which, don't get me wrong, that would be kind of awesome. But this is really good math. So this is right after the Treaty of Guadalupe-Hidalgo. The Gadsden Purchase hasn't happened yet, and Texas is still here. Yes, ma'am.
Is there any deaths because of these fights?
No, unfortunately. Because some of those people, maybe it would have been better if they would have not been. Because you're going to lead to civil war.
Yeah.
Maybe might have avoided civil war. No, I don't. How about just hurt really bad and have it quit? We don't want people to die. But that's another map, and that's going to lead right into the election of 1848. And everybody was talking about Wilmot. And you know what happens when there's an issue that everyone's talking about? Nobody wants to talk about it. And so everybody was running away from Wilmot, except for a few very avid free soilers. Well, the Whigs are going to put up Polk's worst fear, a war hero, old rough and ready, Zachary Taylor. But now he's a Southern Louisiana plantation owner. Also, they need a Northerner. So they nominate Millard Fillmore from New Hampshire. A Northern Whig, Southern Whig. And what was their position on Wilmot? Does anybody want to guess? The Battle of Buena Vista. Hey, we won Buena Vista. What's your position on the American system? He won the Battle of Monterey. Avoid the issues. Buena Vista. Just like William Henry Harrison. But it was a whispering campaign. The Southerners, they said, he's one of us. He's a plantation owner. He just can't say his true feelings. In the North, they would say, Fillmore is a Northern Whig. This is still Henry Clay's party. Zachary Taylor would do what he's told. And Zachary Taylor, nobody knew where he stood. Nobody, including, I would argue, and everything I've read, Zachary Taylor. He really had no position. He was opposed to the war, but he really didn't say anything. He just thought it'd be cool to be president. Well, the Democrats, they're split by this. And so they came up with an idea that's been around for a while. Another term for majority rule called popular sovereignty. We'll let the voters decide in the territories on whether or not they'll have slave codes. So it'll be up to the people, meaning the male citizens of the territories. So they'll let New Mexico territory vote and California territory vote. They nominated Lewis Cass, who tried to get it back in 1844. He just never had enough votes. And he was a war hero from way back in the War of 1812. And by the way, doesn't he kind of look like an angry toad here? Who agrees? That kind of toadish look. Yeah, I expect that tongue to come flashing out any second now. You don't see the toad? You've only been around happy toads. Okay. And they would vote on this. And it appeared democratic. It appeared like it's going to solve the issues. But it's actually a scam. And this was very much what the South wanted. Because the issue is not whether or not they vote up or down to slave codes. It's when they vote. Vote when. If they vote at that moment, 1848, Mexico did not have slave codes. So nobody were slave owners. There were no slave owners, and they would both vote to have be free, aka no slave owners. But if they wait, that means they have to, at least in the short run, open it up to slave codes, and that means temporarily have slaves. Have those codes, and they would probably pass. A future vote means slavery. And this was the South's way to get past 3630 and open up these territories. That was their plan, open them up to slavery. And everybody knew it once they looked at it. This was a scam. Yet the Democrats are going to try this for the next 12 years. This shows how divided they were, though. This is the way to get past Northern and Southern. There's anger over slavery. Well, when the election finally happened, oh, I almost forgot. The Liberty Party rolled into a new party called the Free Soil, and they nominated Martin Van Buren. So just like many Southern Democrats thought he really was a free soil. And this was a free soil, these were free soil Democrats who made up the bulk. There were a few Liberty Party members, some anti-slavery Whigs. There's John Quincy Adams' son, Charles. Looks like an egg with sideburns, but they split the Democrats right now. This would become the roots. The 1848 Free Soil Party, in 6 years, the Republican Party. Free soil Democrats, angry over the expansion of slavery. So Wilmot's kind of people. Well, remember, winner take all. They take away votes from the Democrats. That meant for sure Zachary Taylor would be elected president. So Zachary Taylor didn't win the majority of the popular vote, but that doesn't matter. He won 56% of the Electoral College. The Free Soilers got 10% of the vote, and basically only here. But because of the Free Soil vote, Taylor won New York. Now remember, 10% of the vote, though, doesn't mean anything if you don't win any states and win their electoral votes. So they got no electoral votes, but showed how this could be split. Ironically, the Whigs are in more trouble than the Democrats here. And so Taylor's president, but don't worry, they got lots of time. Taylor has no idea what he's going to do. And so Polk's presidency would end in March, and Polk would die a week after he left office. He had already contracted what? What? Cholera. He caught cholera. He'd be the second president to die of cholera. He contracted it right before, barely held on for the inauguration. Couldn't go. Barely held on and died. Second president to die of cholera. Are we done? There might be one more. I wonder who that could be. But Taylor now took office. And the point is, everyone's talking Wilmot, but they thought they had breathing space. At least they would have thought. Not many people lived in New Mexico yet. Not many people lived in California. They got lots of time, don't they? There's not going to be like any reason for thousands of people to go to California. I can think of no reason at all why anybody would want to go to California. But first off, let's have a snack time. This is my traditional Thanksgiving dinner. Doesn't that look good? It's vague meat with kind of a pea gelatin. Yeah, this one. Doesn't that, who's hungry now? Yeah, a pea gelatin. Ah, delicious. That's a traditional Miles City Thanksgiving right there. I thought you guys would be more hungry. All right, well.
That was terrible.
San Fran looks terrible.
Yeah.
Thank you. Looks delicious. There you
I am the
go.
number one.
It looks like this. We could probably, well, we're not going to say that. It's better than that. All right, San Francisco. That's November 1848. Gee, I wonder if San Francisco is going to look like that. What was discovered the same year as the old election?
Oh.
This delicious food. Come on, people. All right. Gold! Sutter's Mill, California. So John Sutter had a lumber mill, and it was powered by water power. And while doing the sluices to get the water to flow faster, gold was discovered. And they didn't know how much, but they knew it could be a lot, as it turned out to be a massive fund. And don't forget, it's not technically a system called the gold standard, but money is still valued upon gold. Gold is incredibly rare. There hasn't been a major gold strike in the United States. Well, there's a minor one in the 1820s, but that's it. And this is going to trigger a massive gold rush. A massive rush. Now, one of the fastest ways was take these narrow sailing vessels called the clipper ship. And they have 3 masts, big sails, and they would sail around Argentina. Really hazardous trip. But a guy named Cornelius Vanderbilt invested in steamships right before this and hit at the right moment. Take a steamship down to Nicaragua, haul your stuff across Nicaragua that's relatively flat. They have 200 jackasses to carry your goods. And that's kind of nuts. And then sail up to San Francisco. Have you ever heard of Cornelius Vanderbilt? He would later start the New York Central Railroad and become one of the most famous, what they're going to call robber barons. One of the most absolutely ruthless, duplicitous industrial leaders in American history. He would feel guilty about it, and like lots of them, what would he start? So maybe people would think better of him. A college. And he was known as the Commodore for a shipping business, so Vanderbilt, their nickname, are the Commodores, or the Commons. And so, those people who went that year were known as the 49ers, because they went in 1849. Thousands went. Here's another one. Important directions to get to the gold country. Most of them found nothing, but all of a sudden all these people went there. And soon, by the end of the year, there were more than enough to skip the territory phase and become a state. What kind of state? Slave or free? Free. And they want to come in as a free state. And they petitioned, and now Zachary Taylor, he had to make a decision. Congress, which direction he's going to push Congress, and Congress has to decide. And California asking to come in as a free state was literally like somebody exploded a thermonuclear bomb in Washington, D.C. All of a sudden, boom, it's war talk. Overnight. So the issue of slavery in the territories would explode, starting with Texas, then the Mexican War, and then boom. And that leads, well, we got to talk about slavery. And so let's get to, we talk manifest destiny, let's talk a little bit about slavery. Yeah. So I talk about this system, and as we know, we've talked about this before. There's been slavery before. By the way, this is from an abolitionist journal, and this actually was drawn in Britain. Britain's where the abolitionist movement began. It's no coincidence. Industrial Revolution, start there, and then the North of the United States. But it says, "Am I not a man and a brother?" And it's implying, not 100%, but it's implying the evil of enslaving other humans. But there's one important thing about this. What's he doing? What's he doing? Is he begging? He's praying. To whom? Pleading. To whom? It's not God. Inside the abolitionist movement was pretty intense racism. See what you were doing? Pretty intense racism. What was it? He's praying to a white man. And there was a big element of this, where the hierarchy that was created with racism and slavery, it still existed within the abolitionist movement. The abolitionist movement was white racist. It was slavery is horrible, but to a significant number did not mean equality. And so, let's get to a little background. Remember slavery? Okay, there had been slavery before, but not the same kind of slavery that came with imperialism, the British getting their empire, and colonialism. Just to review, we have plantation agriculture, and yes, in New Spain, but also in Virginia. And there's this so-called labor shortage. And all this land, what was the crop? And we know sugar in Cuba. What was the crop in Virginia, colonial Virginia? Yeah. Tobacco, yeah. There's a labor shortage. First, they tried to enslave American Indians. What happened to the American Indians? They either ran away or what? What happened to health-wise? Died of disease, most of them. And so, this is actually sugar plantation. They press the cane to get this kind of a really thick, syrupy water they would use and then turn that into sugar. Well, they tap into the already existing African slave trade. So there's already a massive slave trade going here, and it just makes sense to Brazilians. Brazil was the first, not Brazil, I'm sorry, Portugal, to start trading for slaves along this coast and bringing it to Brazil or to the Spanish colonies here and in the United States. So there was already an existing slave trade. It had nothing to do with color or skin. And remember 1619, the first year we know for a fact African slaves were brought into the British colonies. Almost certainly 1617, but we are not 100% certain. So 1619 we know for sure. Who were mostly English citizens who would sign a contract to agree to be a slave for 7 years normally. Yeah, indentured servants. So they were slaves too. So you had this hodgepodge of people who were slaves, but remember they had contracts. And this is the inspection and sale of the slave. This is actually going into the 18th century. That's Bacon's Rebellion. Bacon's Rebellion was that key moment. Remember, that was that massive class conflict. The rebellion was put down, but what were the name of the laws that were passed? Slave codes, most important were the fornication laws. And that would define. The fornication laws made slavery, those who were slaves, permanent, but unless you had a contract, you could get out. It had nothing to do with color of skin before Bacon's Rebellion. It was much more complex than that, but it went to skin color. Slavery became the darker the skin, the more likely you were a slave. And this is the whole thing about slave, or comes out of this. That's where, as we know it, and it would spread worldwide, racism. This dividing of the lower class. Those with lighter colored skin, they might not have much, but they have a slightly higher status. And then this became quite convenient for an excuse to take the Americans from American Indians, or for that matter, Asia or Africa down the road. So dividing by color of skin. But the whole thing was for the plantation owners to hold their wealth and power. That's where racism comes from. It was all economics. All economics. That means you probably won't be able to do anything about racism until you deal with the economics. But remember the triangular trade? That look familiar? I showed you this very. Do you remember what this was called? They had a name for it. Yeah, the Middle Passage. So we got to talk a little bit about the Middle Passage. So the Middle Passage, this most horrific thing you can imagine. And almost 12 million people, these are estimates. Okay, the shippers took pretty precise records, but there was so much smuggling, especially after people started banning the slave trade. We don't know exactly how much. So Hugh Thomas, he's known as one of the most extensive researchers of this, and about, we're getting here 30 years ago, he put it about 11,300,000. 11 to 12 million. I mean, we're getting numbers that are almost hard to comprehend. People who were uprooted from Africa and brought to the New World. And of those, about a third died in transit. Didn't matter how they were brought on board the ship, about a third died. So this is an unimaginable hell, the international slave trade. We cannot comprehend it. We can talk a little bit about it, but we can't comprehend it. Most are brought to Brazil or to Latin America. Or I'm sorry, to the Caribbean. The United States, 500,000. So that would make sense. By about 1860, there'll be 4 billion slaves in the United States. Obviously going to be very mixed, and we talked about this ancestry. So most are prisoners or debtors. Most are prisoners or debtors. So mostly there are various wars between the different African groups like Ghana, Dahomey, Niger, their capital, Timbuktu, which became kind of this famous city of gold. It turned out it wasn't quite, but there'd be wars. But the big thing, these are debtors. And most of the people who would be enslaved, despite these horrific pictures of these slave copies going through Africa, they are going to be debtors and essentially like indentured servants. They're going to be indentured servants paying off a debt. But the thing is, paying off debt, they become a slave until their debt is paid. Well, you can imagine what's going to be happening. They would sell them to somebody else who would sell them to a trade fortress, and boom, they're on a ship and now. It's kidnapping, horrific kidnapping all the same, but probably 60 to 70% were indentured servants. Which for some reason, that makes it more terrifying to me. The idea if you're captured at gunpoint and made to a slave, okay, that's hell, but most of them agreed to pay off a debt, not knowing that they would be shipped across the Atlantic and go through hell to get to another type of hell. That makes it even more terrifying. These are from anti-slavery journals. They show the horrific slave copies, but yes, the indentured servants would be treated exactly like this. And this one, another one, slavers revenging their losses. So there was a rebellion of those enslaved. So see what's happening to him as we made an example. Do you see it? See the axe. Making an example is an important part of slavery. The whole system of slavery operates under one idea: terror. Terror. It's all terror. And so they would go to these slave forts along the coast of West Africa. So if you look at maps, well into the 1950s and 1960s, but if you ever saw a map of Africa from like before World War I especially, this was called the Slave Coast. See it right there, it's still called the Slave Coast. Just terrifying. There's no real not many natural harbors along the Africa coast. That's part of the reason why there weren't a lot of shipping or trade this way. It was all this way. So the slave ships would anchor off the coast. And then they would make trades with the various tribes who never run the trade forts. This was a trade port run by the Dutch, but most of the people who worked there were other Africans, obviously, because that's who lived there. And they would trade, and they would go through, so imagine these forts, they get all these indentured servants and various people kind of piled in together, and then the slavers in the fort would mix people up from different groups so they couldn't talk, so they couldn't communicate. And then they would purchase them that way. And here, this is 19th century drawing. Whenever you see a 19th century drawing, and they draw them with like this weird little loincloth, that means they're naked. And what they would do, one of the first things, is many of them never been on a boat before, at least a boat on the ocean, is right before they got on, they strip them naked. One of the things that makes us human is clothing. Strip them naked to dehumanize and break them right away. And yes, with a liberal amount of beating and whipping. And get on board the ship, usually there'd be somebody there praying for them. But chained up and then chained down to the bottom. This is what we call a tight packing ship. So there would be 2 decks. These ships can't be very tall. The taller they are, any kind of wave will knock them over. They're not much of a ballast, they don't have a keel. But they have a deck and then a subdeck. And you see how they pack the ship. And then right above, about 3 feet, would be another deck. Laid out, chained up like this. This is tight pack. And that's not the least. And they'd be chained. So here's the process of chaining them down. And then they'd sail away. And they wouldn't let them out, wouldn't let them see for 3 days. So hopefully, for the slave ship, they were outside of the line. Because they have to get them up and moving around and wash them off. There's no bathroom place. They're just chained up. And so once a day, as soon as they get outside of land, they'll bring them up and then walk around for water, which is hell. But they want to make sure they wait 3 days to terrify them and break them. But this was more common. Ultra-tight packers. So ultra-tight packers would be twofold. either sit them, chain them back, and actually literally pull them back so they're kind of sitting on top of each other, or kneeling like this. And the kneeling like this in the stress position is they're in such agony after about half an hour of this, they can't do it. AKA plot some kind of rebellion. Because they always know what happened. Once they lost sight of land, after a couple days, they will fight back. So they can't communicate, and if they're in constant pain, they can't fight back. Can you imagine being like this? I can't even wrap my mind around this. 3 feet above, they would pack them down like that. Don't forget, the only time they get out any kind of cleaning is they'd be brought up on deck, and they would throw some water on. Here it's supposed to be after a little bit, and I told you a third are going to die. So there's a little more room. And after 3 days, they bring them up. And what's the first thing they do? Almost always, to deter a rebellion, if the wind is bad, they might be at sea for 3 weeks. So what's the first thing they do? I know the bell's about ready to ring. They pick out somebody, almost always a male, and do water. Whip them to death in front of everybody. Why? The whole system of slavery operates under the threat of being tortured. Hold on, what do we have tomorrow? How many questions would you like? How about let's go between 9 and 11?
8.5.
We got to work on math, don't we? Between 9 and 11.
10.5.
10.5, we can do that. Luke, come up with a 0.5 of the question. Blue round. Wow. Keep coaching.
The last one. Follow. That's still going on.
It's exactly why. So in the 1960s, they were maroon and silver, but the head coach wanted to have the So when I was in high school, the grids were copper and gold. And to me, that's still the color. I don't like this. Maroon and silver is too hell of a high. I've never liked it. I've never liked maroon and silver. See ya. Goodbye, everybody. 8.5.
Can you give everybody 20, 21 half questions?
Ooh, that's good. How are you?
Good, how are you?
Making it. We gotta take a roll.
I just took a really good nap.
I truly don't like intervention.
I love it.